Okay, I think we're ready to get started here. Thank you guys for coming out. Today we are talking about the remote newsroom. Whether you work with a team remotely or you are working completely remotely with your team, we're going to talk about some best practices today and some questions that you might have run into when working in this remote situation. So my name is Annika Anand. I used to work with a remote team called Chalkbeat. We had people distributed in 4 or 5 different places across the country, working with each other every day. Ran into a lot of these types of issues. So what we are going to do is just start off with brief introductions down the line. So I'm going to ask if each person can say who you are, where you work, what your remote work situation is like, and then one valuable thing about having a distributed workplace.
All right, I guess I'll go first. Hi, I'm Andy Jenkins. I'm the head of news at Storyful, and our operation is a combination of distributed newsrooms and remote employees. So I actually have 5 newsrooms on 4 different continents. Lots of different time zones, but also a couple of people here and there that don't work in any newsroom, so trying to bring them into the fold as much as possible. So that's like, I've got people Australia, Hong Kong, Dublin, New York, Camper in Wyoming. Kelly, I see you there. we have everything. And for us, I think one of the best things about having a distributed workforce like we do, and newsrooms like we do, for one, is we're a 24/7 news operation. The easiest way to do that is to have people in lots of different time zones, not a lot less likely to make people work overnights, for those of us who used to do that for part of our career. You try not to do that to everybody if you can. And it's also a great way to make sure you're bringing people into the newsroom that might not always get their voices in there because they might have a work situation that makes it so they need to be somewhere else, or they speak a language that you really, really need on your staff, but they're not in a location where an office is. You want to make sure you can incorporate those people as well.
I'm Rebecca Eisenberg. I work for Upworthy. I'm Upworthy's senior editor, and I've been at Upworthy for about 4 years. It is an entirely virtual distributed office. About 40% of our staff is in New York, so we do have a co-working space there that's optional for them to go to, but pretty much everyone works out of their house or a coffee shop or somewhere kind of convenient to them. Our entire team, our tech team, business team, all sort of distributed too, which means our office is basically Slack. We just, if you're in Slack, you're working. If you're not in Slack, you're not working. You're in the office, you're not in the office. But we also do a lot of video calls, Google Hangouts appear in, Zoom, all that kind of stuff. And the thing that I find most valuable, similar to what Mandy said, is that one of the nice things about Upworthy is that we have pretty flexible schedules. There's meetings that you have to go to, but if you need to take an hour out of your day to run an errand or whatever, that's fine as long as you're kind of getting your work done. And that allows us to bring in people who need that kind of flexibility, but can still deliver sort of a full-time job commitment. If they have to pick up their kids or are taking care of a sick parent or live somewhere where commuting is really hard, we're able to bring in a lot more voices because of the virtual environment.
Hi everyone, I'm Nasser Al-Hadi. I work for the International Center for Journalists as one of their Knight Fellows in India. The Knight Fellowships program at ICFJ is a distributed team. All of us are people who started in journalism, went on to product strategy roles, and then now have been pulled back and sent back into newsrooms to kickstart innovation projects. There's a couple of us in Latin America, across Africa, and South Asia. So that's how distributed it gets. The way my experience is slightly different is I work on a couple of distributed teams, and all of them have a lot to do with journalism, but they're not necessarily daily news operations. So one is, of course, ICFJ. The other is on the ground in India. I work with a couple of newsrooms on various innovation projects, and so I have a hub that I'm working back with, and they have people out in the field, but I'm usually remote whenever I'm interacting with them. I also help run Hacksackers India, so there's a couple of organizers across multiple cities, and that's a distributed team. Yeah, so that's it.
And what's an advantage of having that distributed team, in your opinion?
You figure out your own schedule, right? And like Rebecca said, our offices are multiple Slacks. So there's one for ICFJ, one for everything else. So.
Right. Cool. So we'll spend a little more time in this discussion talking about processes and culture, because I think that's kind of where a good conversation can happen with us and you guys. But we have made a really handy list of specific tools and tips, so you can check that out at this bit.ly link. We've also made the document editable, so please add in all of your own suggestions as well. I think that's a great way for all of us to be learning from each other. So the first question I want to start off with is, what are some daily rituals that you guys use to stay in touch and maintain a routine with your team?
Yeah, so, is this working? I guess not. Here, let me see.
Right at the bottom.
Whatever. Well, we'll just share one of these. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, on our team, we're using a few different tools that kind of keep our newsroom feeling newsroom-like. One of those things is a 24/7 rolling Google Hangout. So my team, New York's online in the mornings with Dublin. They have some crossover time, and they'll be talking together. They have a handover meeting every day. They're going to do a run-through of what we're working on. The same thing will happen at the end of the day, U.S., when Australia and Hong Kong are coming on. And that team, again, can kind of meet, see what happened today, what's kind of the next thing to be looking at, so that there's never really an end. Like, there's not like a morning and a noon and a night. It's just the day, and it keeps going. And they get on and off that hangout, and they get to all kind of feel like they're all in a newsroom together as much as possible. And I think that ritual of getting people together, seeing each other on a screen, being able to talk to one another, people who've never met in real life in some cases get to still feel like they're part of the same routine and the same newsroom overall in a way that I guess we try to do when we're there in person.
Yeah, at Upworthy, we kind of simulate a real office schedule as much as we can. So we're not around the world, but we're across U.S. time zones. So we have on my edit team, we have 2 daily story pitch meetings, one at 10 a.m. Eastern and one at 1 p.m. Eastern. The writers have to go to one of the 2 meetings. So if you're West Coast, you tend to go to the 1 p.m. meeting, which is 10 a.m. their time. If you're East Coast, you go to the the 10 a.m. meeting. But if you're East Coast and working on something urgent, you can go to the afternoon one. So it's fairly flexible, but we have both of those. And at the start of those, I always run through kind of quick updates. We do, how was your weekend? We get to know each other as people and see each other's faces. And, it's always fun, especially when you're working from home. You can kind of see little bits and pieces of people's lives, pets knocking things over, posters on the walls, stuff like that. So, we don't just sign on and do transactional, like who's doing what today. We sign on and, make jokes and talk to each other. And we send out sort of meeting minutes after both of those for anyone who wasn't on the meeting. They can find out what was discussed, what was assigned, what stories are still kind of up for grabs. And when we're done at the end of the day, we say, I'm signing off for the day. See you guys tomorrow, just like we would in any normal office.
Hey, so again, not a daily operation. So we tend to not have regimens, but work in sprints. So whenever there's a spike in activity, I end up having 9 p.m. calls with the people my colleagues in DC, which is okay because my day is ended. I'm at home. It's easier to report back on what's been happening. I work increasingly with the dev team on the ground for a lot of the projects that I do in newsrooms. And we have a post-lunch meeting. We don't do a morning meeting, because we just figured out for this unique combination of people, we wanted to be able to start our mornings variably. Sometimes someone gets up early and rushes through a project. Sometimes they don't want to. A post-lunch meeting allows for, hey, this is what we started today based on instructions we got yesterday, and if there's a need for a redirect midday, we're able to cover that and work accordingly.
So I want to get right into one of the culture questions here. So, Rebecca, you mentioned, we make a priority to just talk with each other, right? Like, you don't get those natural sort of like walking to the kitchen to grab some coffee type interactions, or some between the meeting type of, chat. So what do each of you do to kind of facilitate that emotional connection to your colleagues?
So we use Slack. We have several channels. One is called Cats, one is called Dogs, one is called Animated GIFs Only, one is called Spoiler Alert. We have a film channel. So people from all over the company with shared interests, regardless of what team they're on, You know, the Cats channel, honestly, is one of my favorite channels. I have a cat, but people go in there and they're like, my cat did this weird thing, is that normal? And we're like troubleshooting each other's pet problems in between taking phone calls. And it's, you know, people who I never would have talked to, someone on the tech team or the biz team or the ops team, who I would only see in person maybe once a year, but I get to know them and a little bit of their life through channels like that. The other thing that I do with my own, I have one small team of writers that I manage, and once a month we get together on a video call for a meeting where we run through sort of successes and failures that we've had recently to kind of open up and be transparent with each other. But the second half of that meeting, one of the writers will run it, and you know, one time we did, what are you obsessed with this week? And we just sort of shared what we were obsessed with. And the other time, someone had just come back from a trip and wanted to ask everyone, what was a trip you thought would be bad but was actually great? And we all got to learn about each other in this sort of once a month, hour-long meeting that then you go back into Slack and you know each other better as people.
One of the things that we see is for larger teams, when you get to 15, 20 people, nothing really beats FaceTime. But you're not able to get into situations where everyone, all 20 or 15 of you get together anyway. So what we try and do is the 2 or 3 people that work the most together, especially in the ICFJ networks context, we try to meet at least twice or thrice a year, either on this side of the Atlantic or that. And that takes a little hustling to try and combine us meeting with other events, et cetera. So for instance, we have, I think, we're possibly the largest gathering of Night Fellows at ONA this time, ICFJ Night Fellows. There's about 8 of us. I see a couple from Africa, South Asia, LATAM in the audience. We combine that with orientation for new fellows and catching up for everyone who's been here for a while, and ONA and other meetings that we did want to do in New York or other cities around. That said, the random GIF Slack channels have worked for some of the teams I've been on. The catch, the disclaimer there is, I have seen situations where someone wanted to put up a thank you GIF, and the one that showed up said, marry me, so, yeah.
That's tricky.
Yeah.
Mandy, any thoughts?
Yeah, sure. Obviously, I think Slack you're probably going to hear come up a lot. I mean, that's definitely one where it's been a real point of togetherness for my staff, because in addition to having people in a lot of places, we have a lot of cultures kind of coming together and crashing in there too. So it lends itself to, we have a Dublin channel that's just for Irish jokes that I don't understand. I try. I just don't even get it. Like, is that funny? Is that an insult? I don't really know. And you know, there's a few of them that are kind of cross-pollinating as well, getting people together in ways to try to get them to kind of come on a common ground. Like we have a Premier League Fantasy Football League. We have an NFL Fantasy Football League. We had to make it even the playing field a little bit because, you know, they don't all know the NFL that well. But, you know, we're working on things like that, little things we can do to keep exporting our cultures from different places to get people involved in that. But one thing that I think has been really important, too, especially for the people who work remotely and aren't in one of our offices, is giving them the opportunities to not only like take on projects and lead projects, but also lead meetings. It's kind of tempting to make it so that, you know, just me and I travel between all of our offices quite a bit. But, you know, that it isn't just me here dictating to them in every meeting, that, you know, hey, the person in Atlanta who is out there on their own, cats and dogs everywhere, can lead that meeting and, you know, still gets to like really be a part of the team and have that face-to-face interaction and not getting left out just because they don't happen to be there.
So obviously that is one challenge that we face in remote work is having those casual interactions. There's a slew of others. So I wonder if each of you can just talk about one recent challenge that you've faced and how you've tried to solve that.
Do you guys want to start? I just went.
Sure, why not?
Okay,
so I mentioned this earlier. I usually parachute into newsrooms, and that basically can be a situation where I don't know anyone there. And because I'm not going to be there on a daily basis, it takes a while to build relationships and actually start to identify the people that you'd be able to work with, potential change makers, project ideas, etc. There's nothing that beats appointment viewing. The way you know 3 p.m. on AXN is going to be comedy or 9 p.m. is going to be thrillers. We set up something called Digital Fridays in pretty much every newsroom I work with. That's Friday, 3 to 5 p.m. I walk in for about 2 hours. The first hour is demos and case studies for stuff that we want to use, tools. The second hour is exercises. And right after that, it usually becomes a funnel for people that I can work with in the newsroom. It helps build collaborations, start working on incubating projects, and so on. Like I said earlier, nothing beats FaceTime. So, yeah.
I'm trying to think I think one of our most recent challenges that I'm very happy with sort of our solution for has been, onboarding people in a remote environment where you don't have an IT department and you don't have the ability to look over someone's shoulder, and doing like an extended Google Hangout screen share is like nerve-wracking to people. So, as we've been onboarding people, we used to do it in groups. You would onboard 5 people at once, which meant we could sort of justify, we'll all go to one place and do some onboarding in person. But as we've brought people on individually, it's been a little bit more of a struggle because, especially if they're new to remote work, they feel very isolated, they feel like they're struggling, and they can't see anyone else around them having similar issues or how other people are coping. And so over the course of sort of my 4 years at Upworthy, we've built this, we have a very our hiring process screens for some of the technical things that you need to be able to do to survive in a virtual office. And the other thing is, when we onboard people, we have a 2-week curriculum that sort of slowly skill builds over time, where like when we onboard new writers, they're always like, why do you have me making GIFs and graphics on day 2? I just want to write. And I'm like, because if you get to week 3 and you haven't done it yet and you need a GIF in your piece, you're not going to want to take the time to learn it. But we're going to make you do it on day 2. And on day 3, you're going to have to use Google's Find a Time feature to set up 10 phone calls over the course of the first 2 weeks so that they run through using that system as many times as they can. And so we have about 2 weeks of readings and tasks and stuff like that, and by week 3 they're like settled in and ready to go.
Yeah, I'd say onboarding is one of the hardest things, especially when you're just so spread out. So even aside from the issues, I guess, of if someone's remote, that's even harder. And for us, we use a lot of proprietary tools to do the work that we do, and we have a lot of processes that aren't used anywhere else. So training is a really big deal for us. We don't really get a lot of people that are fully formed when they're coming in. We have to build the journalists that we want, and so bringing them in and making sure everyone is getting the same training, they have the same background. They're getting access to all the information they can, and especially getting access to all of the people in our company that have been there the longest and have really unique experience, but they're all over the place. So it's, hi, a new hire in New York, you're going to need to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning because I really want you to meet with Owen in Germany. And he's really great. He's one of our best trainers, but this is the only way we can make this work. So sorry, but this is how we're going to have to do that. So that's been a challenge. One of the things we've done to get around that is actually budgeting now that every new hire goes to our headquarters in Dublin for a week. They do lots of in-person training, just job shadowing, getting to meet a lot of people on the team that they might not ever see again in person, and including our product teams. We work very closely with our technology team, so it's a good opportunity for them to meet those people too, so that they know who to reach out to when they have suggestions. So it's expensive to do that, but it honestly has solved a lot of our problems of having that first week that they're with the company. Everybody kind of, I joke that they're getting indoctrinated, but yeah, they're getting indoctrinated in the same way if they're doing it in the same office with the same people all the time. And they like going to Dublin. It's a pretty good perk.
So more on that, I'm curious, Rebecca, you mentioned, as part of your screening process for hiring candidates, you actually have them take a test and to see how technically capable they are. What are other things that you guys are doing to either, screen for certain skill sets when you're trying to hire somebody for remote work, or maybe, Nasser, in your experience, things you do to prepare people for being ready to work remotely with you?
You want to take that first? So in my case, and this won't necessarily apply to everyone, I have never hired someone through an application process and then testing them or onboarding them for a while. Most of the people that I've eventually brought in on a team have been people that I've been following for months before. I know I'm going to hire somebody like this down the line, and I spend a lot of time getting them to the events that I'm doing or the events they're doing, exposing them to the kind of work we do and how we do it. And until we have that feeling of this person may or may not be a fit, there's no decision. So, yeah.
For us, one of the things that we do, in particular, if we're hiring editors, is we ask them to write, we give them sort of a series of writing prompts, but for interacting, with a writer potentially. And we ask them to address everything as though it's an email, because we're assuming that a lot of the communication and feedback is not going to be face-to-face. It might be, sometimes it is, you get on a call and you talk through a piece, but a lot of it is over email. And if you can't effectively communicate edits over email or in a chat program, like that's going to make it very difficult for you, obviously, to edit a writer. So we do things kind of like that. We also do, all of our interviews are done over Google Hangout, which is, if you can't get onto the Google Hangout, that's how we communicate. You need to be able to get into Google Hangout. And, that kind of helps us filter.
And for us, yeah, we also, I think, have a kind of a similar process for that, definitely interviewing a lot of people in person. It's kind of twofold, I think, as to how it's really worked well for us. One being that I'm constantly interviewing people all the time, even if I'm not hiring, especially if someone reaches out to me and they say, I'm really passionate about your company, what you're doing. You might not have any openings, I just want to talk to you. I always will take that meeting, because when something comes up and it happens to be, like, I remember that conversation with that person, and that'll be a go-to. I'll say, we're going to make sure that person gets into the interview process, like building that pipeline. And also, hiring really great interns and keeping track of them after they leave, because maybe I'll have a job that's perfect for that person. They already know what we do, so we can call them in and actually have them be a part of it. But in terms of the applicants, and we do open up jobs and post them, I think, it's only fair to do that. You don't want to just go to who you know. It's very challenging for us, and I don't think this is just about distributed newsrooms. Like 90% of the applications I get are from people that I'm pretty sure don't know what my company does. So then there's that 10% that we can work with them. And then we do some pretty extensive testing once we get them into an interview process. So for one thing, looking for a cultural fit, someone who's just game. I just want, I can kind of tell within 15 minutes of talking to someone if they're going to work on our team or they're not. If they're just someone who's really eager, they like trying new things, they just say, bring me in, teach me stuff, I'll learn, I'll do anything, I just want to go try to do some cool new stuff. I'm like, yes, this person, this is who I want. So then we give them a test, and we have a verification test that we do, since that's a big part of our business. We want to see how someone works, so it's a little different each time as to how we set it up, depending on their region. We want to give them something that's going to be a little challenging, but not just impossible. So we really want to see how they work out, how to determine if something on social media is real. And we also do a copy editing and editing test, which people don't seem to remember that startups should probably do that still. Make sure people still know how to write. Because a lot of the people we bring in actually don't come from a traditional journalism background, so it's a good way for us to sort of know what we're getting into copy-wise, if we can get that out of the way right up front. So they have to pass all three of those things to really make it for us.
Yeah, and kind of on that subject of, training people, trying to get them, into the processes of the workplace, how do you guys keep sort of a shared set of standards across your newsrooms? Sometimes it's easier in a traditional newsroom, you just have people kind of like yelling at each other, kind of like nudging each other on how to do this, how to do that. So how do you guys do that? How do you maintain those shared standards?
For me, it varies from across the teams that I work with, for instance. So the newsrooms that I'm working with on the ground or with ICFJ, like I mentioned earlier, I usually start by getting people inducted into the local Hacks Hackers organizers pool, because that's a very fantastic test bed for figuring out how well people work if they're just collaborating over chat or Slack or whatever else. I have someone in the audience I hired very recently who started into the process an entire year before the hiring decision was made. So, like I said, by that time, you already have a feel of the person, and they have a pretty clear sense of how you work. So there's no regimen for documenting standards and sharing them across as a Google Doc, if I may. On the other hand, I know other networks, our counterparts in Africa, who have declared a set of standards on GitHub as a wiki, and that's what everyone refers to as a common operation code.
So we have a couple things at Upworthy that we use. We have internal wiki sites. So we have one for the edit team, we have one for the ops team. The edit team has, here's the org chart, here's sort of our resources for formatting, you know, we have our style guide, all of that stuff is there for the writers to sort of access as needed. And then we also have a deck called our editorial brief. And that has different, sort of how we handle different topics at Upworthy. So it identifies what a white savior narrative and why you should avoid it, and how we talk about things like GMOs or, you know, abortion or any sort of complicated subject. And it has how we want to talk about it, and then examples of our stories and other stories on other sites that do it well. And that document is not just for our edit team, that's actually a company-wide document for our sales team, for our tech team, for our sponsored content team. That set of standards goes across the whole company. And then on a piece-by-piece basis, everything goes through an editor. We have 3 editors, myself included. All of us meet once a week to look at data. We review every single piece of content from the week before, how it did, how the audience reacted to it, how it was told, if there's anything in the way it was told that, you know, we can learn from and do better next week, and we bring that back to our teams. And the very last step before any piece goes out is it goes through our standards and copy team. And they're sort of our last line of defense, and they have a set of standards that they hold every piece to, and it keeps everything kind of even.
I'd say our setup is similar in a lot of ways. We have a lot of things we call user guides, because we have lots of different workflows and lots of different roles on our team that everyone on our team has to know how to play, depending on what kind of story they're covering that week, or what platform they might be working on, because we do work some that's specific to Facebook and specific to YouTube, and I want the staff to experience all of that. So we have these guides, so that's like, oh, it's been a month since I've done that. I have to go back and kind of refresh myself. And we're constantly evaluating those workflows, but it's very detailed, written out. This is everything that needs to happen on this shift. Here are the things to know. And the same thing goes for policies that we're kind of constantly writing up too, just so people know how we can standardize across the company. So for instance, you know, policies written on how we cover transgender issues and how you write about transgender people. Writing about how you deal with militants. We have to do a lot on social media where we're talking to people who may not be the most savory individuals. How do you interact with militants? How do you protect yourself when you're interacting with people in that space? Everything that you need to know about covering Syria. Everything that you need to know about covering Ukraine. Like, we have lots of people who are very good at specific things, and that's a good way to share that knowledge across the company. So keeping those documents is huge. The hard part is keeping those up to date all the time, but that's a constant, ongoing change there. But also, yes, the layer of editing is really important. On our shifts, like I said, we're 24/7, and around the clock, we're going to have an editor that's on with the employees. Nothing of ours goes out. You know, we're working directly to journalists, but nothing our staff is publishing is going out anywhere anyone will see it, unless at least one editor has seen it. And they're checking not only things like copy, but looking at all of our verification standards, making sure all of our sourcing is correct. And they are the people who are the most experienced. So everything gets that treatment before it goes anywhere. And all of those editors have the same training and are very much in charge of the moment to moment is what's going on in their shift. So that's a really important part of our standards too.
Yeah, and what strikes me as you guys talk about these things is this is not just good practices for remote newsrooms. This is good practices for all newsrooms, right? I mean, to have that level of documentation and to have those layers is really valuable. So and maybe just being in a remote newsroom sort of forces you into that process a little bit faster. So I want to throw a hypothetical situation at you. It's been a hard day, either something, you had to make some sort of tough decision, or there's been some sort of company announcement and everyone's feeling a little bit like, oh my gosh, you know, like that was really tough. I think what happens in, you know, a newsroom where you're all working in the same place is you might go out and grab a drink after work, or you go to lunch, or you grab some ice cream or whatever, and you're able to just kind of talk about it, you know? What do you do in those situations? How do you keep the morale of the team up and kind of, you know, have that bar side chat with people?
We actually do virtual happy hours where Upworthy, we can charge our company cards for like a drink or a bottle of wine or whatever, and we all get on a video call together and we talk. It's super awkward. Everyone feels really uncomfortable for like the first 5 to 10 minutes. And then like the wine kicks in or someone's kid does something weird in the background and it like breaks the ice and it's really fun. Our most recent one we actually did, there's some like trivia games and stuff you can play online. And we had like 20 people playing trivia games and drinking beer. I mean, yeah.
The organizations I'm in, for instance, the newsrooms, for instance, they're larger, so about 700 people on the floor. So I am not faced with a situation where the entire pool of 700 is down. But what we try and do is motivation isn't necessarily like a concentrated responsibility, 2 or 3 people accountable for it. We try and enable, empower as many people on the news floor to take on unofficial leadership positions. And so what happens is whenever one of those teams seems to be slacking, if for lack of a better word, as in slacking, not slacking, we usually wing it. There's no set standard for, okay, when everyone's down, push this red button and they get pepped up. So it can be anything from figuring out if we haven't met for a while, figuring out a time to meet. It can be everyone showing up on the random GIF channel and doing weird stuff. It can also be just turning it into an ideation session, which is where no one's accountable for what they say now. Come up with the weirdest stuff that you actually think is doable in the newsroom, want to do, and let's give it a shot. Most of it doesn't pan out.
For us, it isn't even really a hypothetical. I mean, this is something we have to face all the time. With my staff, we work with eyewitness video, so they work on some pretty horrible stories all the time. So morale is a constant thing that we have to watch out for, and just self-care in general. They're constantly having to see people die on camera, pretty much. So a way that we deal with that, especially if it's a big story that everyone worked on, something like the Paris attacks or the Brussels attacks or something like that, that really, it's really noticeable on my team after a few hard weeks, especially, God, 2016 can just go to hell. It's been such a bad year for them, all of them in a row. And after weeks like that, for one thing, all of us as editors in the individual offices and on our shifts, we really make it a point to reach out to each person and make sure, hey, are you okay? Just want to make sure you're taking some time. This has been kind of a rough week. How's it going? And also making sure that as a team, me as the leader of this team, our CEO as well, the people on our product team are sending messages to the team hey, you guys have done a really great job. I know this has been a really hard week. Just having people know that they're appreciated has been a big part of that. And then also, I think you kind of see people reach out a lot more during times like that. My company, my editorial team has a WhatsApp group that it's really just whenever they're out and about, they're messaging people, they're sending photos. That it just tends to really blow up in the days after really hard stories. You can just tell, I wanted to show you my life right now. Let's all just talk on here. And it's been a great outlet there too. But I think most importantly, when it comes to issues like that and morale issues like that, it's about having really open conversations. Because you're remote, you don't see everybody, you kind of have to push people a little bit, make sure that they're taking care of themselves and that you're aware of any issues with them, because you want to make sure that they're feeling supported. And it's a lot harder when you're not all seeing each other face to face. You can't see that, wow, that person looks really down, or they kind of came in late 5 days in a row, and that's not like them. You don't really notice those things as well remotely, so you have to really be a lot more proactive.
Yeah, we actually, you just reminded me, we kind of back channel to each other. If I know that the product team worked their butts off to get a product out, and it was a long slog for them. All my writers see is this new product appeared. They don't know that that happened. So I will back channel to my writers and be everyone jump in the product room right now, shout thank you, and then get out and let them go back to work. But especially in the virtual environment, like you were saying, when you don't see people and you don't see that they came in to work, late 5 days or whatever, it can be really easy because everything's so transactional and because you have to go out of your way to communicate that you find yourself only giving bad news. You only speak to someone when you have something to say that they did wrong, or you only use video calls to deliver bad news. So making sure that you're being really deliberate about going out of your way to praise things when things are good, and making sure that people feel appreciated and validated, whether it's your team or your team helping another team, if they're having a hard week, is really important.
So in my part of the world, people management as a function in newsrooms is reduced to HR managing payroll and hiring or whatever, right? And there's no Most of the time, there's no real vision for growth for employees or a clear roadmap for how a team is going to evolve into something bigger, et cetera. And what that does is I end up being the unofficial therapist in most of the newsrooms I'm working with, and most of the talk is not necessarily about gory stories that they've had to deal with, but actually about inefficient communication from the top. Like I said, large teams, management to the last person in the hierarchy, the communication is sometimes a lot very ineffective, and so I hear a lot of rants. Do I have a perfect solution for dealing with them? No, I don't. Usually just listening to people helps, and I have the advantage of being the outsider embedded in a newsroom, so maybe that's why they think it's a safe space. I don't say that, but yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. So one last question, and then we'll open it up to you guys for your questions, so be thinking about those. What's one piece of advice, or maybe several pieces of advice, that you have for newsrooms who are considering going remote right now?
I have a couple of them. One being that I think a lot of people see something like a remote workforce and they see it just as a way to save money, which it's a great way to save money. You don't have to have offices. But it also is a great way to bring diversity in your newsroom. And I think that that is something that's really overlooked a lot. And when people kind of dismiss the idea of going to a remote workforce, they're just like, oh, it's a way to cut costs and you can't control everything. But you can get people in there that you wouldn't otherwise get if you're just hiring people that all live in New York. You're going to get a bunch of people that live in New York, and we all tend to be pretty similar. But you can get people who live in the Midwest or who are taking care of a sick parent or have kids that maybe their life isn't going to be working to make them move to New York and go to an office. You can really get lots of different skills and backgrounds in when you open up a remote workforce, but you still have to keep in mind that's what you're doing there, is trying to find people who bring something unique to the table. And also, and I put this in the tips, but I can't stress enough that if you're going to have a tough conversation with somebody, that to not do that in text format, because it's just awful. It never feels good, context never comes through. It just feels very cold, and even if that's because it's very tempting, especially as a manager, to be like, oh, I really do not want to have this conversation with you. I'll just put it in Slack and let the chips fall where they may. Just don't ever do that. If you're working with remote employees, you've got to have a way to have that face-to-face conversation with them, and yes, don't only do it when news is bad.
Yeah, that's actually one of my pieces of advice. At Upworthy, we say escalate the medium, not the tone. Because even in email, even if you're not giving bad information or negative information, tone gets lost and we're all super busy and we have a ton of email. So one of the first things we tell people when they're hired is we say, email's a weird way to communicate. It's gonna feel weird. You're gonna have a moment where you think someone's being really passive aggressive and they're not, they were just busy. So one, try not to take it personally, assume best intentions, and then if it continues, escalate the medium, not the tone. Get on a video call right away. Don't keep going back and forth in email because you'll just both kind of annoy the crap out of each other. The other thing that I think is really important is while, yes, distributed offices can kind of save money in a way, budgeting for in-person time is really important. Whether that means making sure that employees have conference budgets where you can get 2 or 3 people at a conference together, and then that's kind of joint beneficial. We have once a year all staff retreats, and then teams have sort of smaller retreats within that. And then every now and then, my boss and I needed to work out. We were building a brand new story budget and needed to just have time to work together. And she came down to my apartment in Baltimore for 3 days, and we knocked everything out that we needed to knock out way more efficiently than we could have done, virtually in between meetings and calls and all this stuff. So distributed is really good, but making sure that when you need it, you can get in-person time is also really important.
In my experience, meetings for the sake of meetings usually end up being decision bottlenecks. So I haven't ever seen regimens work very effectively, like a daily status report or whatever. One of the newsrooms I was in, this 20-something kid came up with a bot in Slack for the daily status report. Not organization-wide, but for teams of 10 or 20. And what that did was ask 3 basic questions that you want everyone to answer. They have an interval, answer these between, 9 a.m. and noon. And everyone gets to look at a common spreadsheet of what everyone's doing today and how far they're into whatever project they're working on. It just takes that, you end up saving that entire 30 minutes to 45 minutes in the morning that you'd spend on what's everyone up to? Bots. So.
Cool. That's a great hack. Questions in the audience? Just raise your hand high.
I'll send you a mic.
Send you a mic.
Hi, I'm Eliza. I'm with RT America, and we have multiple kind of different newsrooms. So we have the broadcast newsroom in the US that's pretty self-contained, and we have the web newsrooms that are in New York, LA, DC, Dublin, UK, and Moscow. And we have to deal with both of those things. And I really want to get us on Slack, but everyone's really like, but we use Skype, and Skype works. And any suggestions for how to get us all on Slack so we can be on the same page? Like, we did it really well for a little bit of the conventions, and then it crapped out on somebody's phone, and everybody went back to Skype. So what's some advice to like kind of get everyone all on the same page for using tools that really benefit?
This is probably not what you're expecting to hear, but like, it can't be a democracy when something like that happens. As soon as I joined my company, I insisted that we were moving to Slack, and there was a lot of like, oh, well, okay, we'll set it up, but we still are going to have our old things. The people would still use them. We just turned off the old stuff. I just made it so they couldn't access it anymore. Because it's like, that's how you're going to get onto the news. Like, I know that you didn't get a vote in this, but we all have to get to the same place. And this is how it's going to be. This is what this team is doing, and it's working really well. We've talked about this. I didn't spring this on them. Over like several months of people being like, I don't know if I want to do this. Like, well, we're going to turn off the old one. So this is how we're going to do it. I'm sure other people have more diplomatic ways of doing it, but that's how we went to Slack, and now everyone loves it, and we all forgot those dark times.
I actually don't know that there's a more diplomatic way to do it. That's kind of what we did. We did do sort of a slow, our tech team started using Slack first. We used to use a program called HipChat, and so our tech team started using it first, and then our editorial management team moved over so that we could get a feel for it and start coming up with what kind of channels we needed once the writers came over to join us. And then once everyone was over, you know, it was kind of the rest of the company just had to join us. But we do, periodically people, you know, sort of say, oh, I'm frustrated with Slack because of this, and then you sort of realize that it's because they don't know how to use it right. And so I actually recently sent around an email, it was like a month ago, and people are still responding to it, that was just Slack hacks, and everyone's just responding with, here's how I use Slack, or here's my problem, how do you solve it? And it's made using Slack way better kind of for everyone by sharing, one, the frustrations, and two, the solutions.
So I don't know if there's a perfect answer to this. I have 3 different experiences from 3 different organizations with the exact same problem. The first one did a version of what Mandy talked about, which is if your boss is going to respond only on Slack, you're going to be using Slack. That the person at the top stops being accessible on every other platform, and you start getting your instructions only on Slack, it works. And usually the top of the pyramid is like smaller, so it's a smaller group of people to get on board. That worked to an extent in one of the organizations I was in. With the dev team that I work, we went from Skype to Slack to HipChat to now Basecamp, which I hate, but it's their choice. At this point, I'm of the opinion that the tool doesn't matter. Whatever the team is okay with, just stick with that, because driving that change is painful and heartbreaking and too much of an effort. And the third experience that I had was, which was comparatively more successful than the other 2, was we started considering onboarding like a continuous exercise. So you catch people early. Attrition in Indian newsrooms is about as high as 30%. I don't know about the US, which means the pool, there's a constant churn in the pool. And so what we did was, instead of working on the new people, we worked on everyone who was coming in, catch them early. So stuff like Slack or the analytics stuff we were using, Parsley, a couple of the other tools. We have sessions on them going around the year that you just push people onto as and when they join, and because that's the first thing they're exposed to, and it's usually new for a lot of people. So they're really excited about it, and that excitement kind of creates a momentum, at least for their teams, that the ones that they end up in. That said, I'm working with 2 newsrooms right now where half the place uses Slack and half doesn't, and it works.
And one thing I'll say too, in addition to all this, that a way I've found to get buy-in on new tools and new processes, because we're constantly evaluating something new of like, hey, like let's try this thing out. The thing that's really helps is that for one thing, that often is coming up through my staff. It's not coming down from me. Like someone on my staff says, hey, we should start using Trello for our editorial planning. We're like, all right, well, you go try it out. You know, get a couple of other people, go do that. They really like it. I just have them take it to the team, because honestly, more often than not, I think at least on our team, they're a lot more likely to listen to each other than they are to listen to me. Or they're just going to assume like, you know, she's just, you know, going to tell us to do this, and I guess we'll do it, it's fine. But like, they get really excited about it when it's someone else on the team has been doing this, and it was their idea, and they developed it. So more and more often, as often as we can, when someone has an idea like that, I encourage them to be the one that pushes it. And then, you know, if adoption becomes a problem, that's when I'll step in. But I mean, if it comes from the team, it really does help get a lot more people excited about it.
Exactly. The sessions that I talked about that go on around the year, it's people who've been using it on the floor. So you end up kickstarting that stuff, but people from the floor graduate into trainers themselves, and they take it on. And it's exactly the same thing. They're more likely to listen to each other than to someone giving them instructions. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Marina from Reportedly. We've been a remote-only newsroom, and we lived on Slack, basically. That was our home. Still is. I was wondering if you guys have found some ways to incorporate fun into the working day, because I found one of the hardest things of a remote newsroom was the physical part of being together in the same place, which I just make very silly comparisons so you can get an idea of what I'm thinking about. Like, I'll buy you coffee. Come with me, I'll buy you coffee. It's a hot coffee, it's physical, it's a cup, I'll buy it for you. Or, hey, look, we've almost got the same shoes today. That's something that's never going to happen in a remote newsroom. And that's actually very bonding. Those are little things that are very bonding. And we found periodical solutions by meeting in person every few months. But that was totally lacking from our working day, and it was much that we could do. So I was wondering if you guys have found a way.
So I actively track free events in my ecosystem and actively recommend them to anyone I'm working with remotely. So they just become an excuse to meet them at someone else's cost, and that works.
I mean, I kind of mentioned this earlier. We do a lot of like sort of random Slack channels where sort of side conversations can happen. We have dad jokes, cats, spoiler alert, like all sorts of things. We also occasionally do like Adam Mordecai, who's here, went away on a trip for like a week, and when he came back, we had all changed our names and our photos to Adam Mordecai in Slack. And there was no like end game to this prank. It was just like really fun and funny, and we kind of pranked ourselves because we no longer knew who anyone was. And he's in Denver, and so we were all online for like 3 hours waiting for him to come back online and recognize it. So I don't know, I mean, we do fun things like that. We've done, at one point, when morale was a little bit low, my boss sent out care packages, physical care packages, and in it, there were, you know, it had, I think she got us all Snuggies and like little, like, you know, some writing tips and stuff. But in it, there was a note that said, when you get this box, join the Slack channel. I don't remember what the name was. It was like Happy Box or something. You like joined that Slack channel, and so slowly you saw people kind of show up with like a photo of themselves in a Snuggie, and there were different Snuggie patterns. There was like team plaid versus team leopard print versus team red, I think. And then the last person's box got lost in the mail, and we were all kind of waiting. No one was able to talk about it publicly for like 3 weeks until the box finally showed up. But it was super fun, and it's something that we all it created a running joke, an in-joke. You know, you see people show up on calls wearing their Snuggies. It was really fun. I don't know.
I have a quick follow-up to that. Whose responsibility, like whose job is that to come up with these like creative ways of engaging the team?
For us, it's we do it as editors. You know, we kind of we have a weekly management meeting, and we kind of take a temperature of like, how is everyone feeling? Like, do the writers seem like morale is low? Like, do we need to do something fun? What's something people have been saying they want to do? We're doing actually next month. We're doing a back to school thing. We're actually sending everyone to do one course at the Pointer News U thing, and then everyone's going to give a 5-minute presentation on what their course was. And please don't tweet this because this is a surprise for my writers, but I'm sending them all sort of Upworthy notebooks and pens for back to school supplies. So we do things like that when we feel like it's needed.
So I have a quick question, just very quickly. What's the age spectrum on the remote teams that you guys work with?
Mine is very wide. I have several people who, you know, like 30 years of experience in newsrooms, and they left traditional news and wanted to come work for us, but all the way to like 20-year-olds. I'm just like, I don't even know how you're doing this. Weren't you like a baby 5 years ago? But yes, we have the very wide range of people.
Yeah, I think our range is like 20 to 40.
Yeah, I asked because we tried pranks once, and they felt like flat on the face.
We have had pranks fall flat on their face too.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, culturally, that's the only place where like something like that can be tough for us, because jokes translate very differently between like the Irish and Asians and Australians and Americans. There's lots of isms that we all have that others don't get, though we are all picking them up, and I think that's kind of one of the things that is a bonding point for our company, especially when they're all on video chats together. I'm like, what did you say? What is that? And then everyone kind of goes around with the things that we call it this, or what was that expression even supposed to mean? And I think that, yeah, it's hard. You never know how something will be taken. Pranks have certainly happened, but
we do have some people who have said, never, ever, ever prank me, and we absolutely respect that. Like, if you do, like, we prank Mordecai because Mordecai enjoys pranks, and he likes them. But if someone doesn't like them, we absolutely would not prank them.
Hi, Steve Herman from BBC News. First, thanks very much. It's a great panel with loads of fantastic tips. I think some of the most interesting stuff that you've been talking about has been cultural, you know, the way that you handle the communication between teams and how that differs from place to place. I guess every organization is different, but my question is specifically about hierarchy and bosses, and where do you see bosses in this mix? Should they be in there doing the jokes and, you know, being on Slack, and, you know, is there a sense of hierarchy in your places, and how does that fit into dispersed newsrooms, do you think?
I know for me, if I couldn't be part of all this, I would not want to be a boss anymore, because like that's the fun part, and I'm kind of a fun-loving person. For our editors actually tend to be a lot of the people who are kind of keeping this going, and it was an interesting thing, because when I joined my company, it was still very much in a startup type phase. There wasn't a hierarchy at all. Everybody was kind of at the same level, but it was kind of chaos. So when I came in, I kind of had to start making a hierarchy, getting a level of editors. And I think for a little while, there was kind of this idea that that's going to change everything, is that everyone reports to somebody. We have to write things down. There's a schedule. All of those kinds of things. But you know, the thing that made that great is having those bosses also be the people who are the most in tune with the people that they're working with, and thus are also going to be more likely to know what they're going to find fun. Especially that cultural thing is very important there. You know, the Irish editors know exactly what's going to like rile up the Irish employees, and the U.S. editors know exactly what's going to get the U.S. employees engaged. It turns out it's a ping pong table.
My experience is almost exactly identical. I came in, Upworthy was a very flat structure. We all sort of edited each other and everything, and we've sort of evolved over the years to have more of a hierarchy. We have an editorial director, we have a managing editor, I'm senior editor, we have an editor, associate editor, writers, senior writer, you know, we have all of that. But the thing that I've found that's exactly the same as you is because it's virtual, because it's all in Slack, because, you know, in a physical office, you might have two people kind of laughing over a joke that, you know, sort of to the side, and the boss would come by and be like, don't joke, this is a serious place of work. In a virtual office, people feel very, you know, do they make the joke in Slack, do they not? It's written down, someone's gonna see it. If you're the boss and you sort of set the precedent that joking around in Slack is okay, that, you know, putting a weird GIF into a conversation is just part of how we communicate. And if Jiffy backfires on you and something inappropriate shows up, we know it's not your fault. It happens to us too. You know, it makes everyone feel more comfortable doing that. And so when we see if it gets to like 2 p.m. and Slack's been really quiet, like in our management team room, we'll be like, someone go like do something fun in the edit room because everyone's really boring today. And we try to like get that stuff going. And it starts a lot of times with the editors.
And I think I should note too, at least in our Slack, we have tons of custom emojis that have been made of pictures of our CEO and of other bosses that are kind of used to illustrate those conversations sometimes. It's like, you know, a picture of our CEO looking very worried is one where like that's this kind of the sign of like this needs to stop. Like what this is going down a path that is not a good place to be. But the fact that everyone like made those and everyone's fine and happy with them, I mean, it makes it a very lighthearted thing to do.
We make a lot of custom GIFs of ourselves. Like every now and then I'll respond to an email with like 2 thumbs up, like a GIF of me doing that instead of just writing like, good job. And it's just, I don't know, then the writers save it and throw it back in my face. It's fine. It's fine.
You guys dealt with the way of dealing with bosses in this kind of a remote mix. One of the things that I had to face and my way of dealing with it evolved over time was just letting everyone know who's driving what and the structure of the organization. And eventually what I got to was actually having a visual seating plan, a virtual seating plan for an office that doesn't exist necessarily and where you can actually point people onto. This is seated, X is seated here, Y is seated here, and you can actually look at who's in charge of what. It's something I talked about yesterday at a talk here. You can check out the link. It's called spadenewsroom.com. It's an open blueprint for organizations to be able to adopt for this. I also have it linked somewhere in the doc that you're seeing on the screen right now. It's spadenewsroom.com, spade as in the card spade, and newsroom.com. It's a work in progress, to be honest. And what you see there is a virtual seating plan, each seat mapped to specific teams, hubs, and role descriptions that you can just pick and apply to your newsroom. Role descriptions would mean everything from persona description for the kind of person who fits in here, but a toolkit, skill set, everything. So it's a little more than what you asked for, but you can start by just putting names in there.
So I think we have time for one more question really quick.
Thanks. First of all, I wanted to say I really appreciate your insights. My name is Kat Friedrich, and I'm a news editor at Yale Center for Business and the Environment. So I'm in a situation where it's a bit complicated to use Slack because we have 35 to 40 grad students who are writers participating. And because they're grad students, they have a ton of assignments. I want to, on one hand, make them feel comfortable informally chatting with me, but on the other hand, I don't want to burden them with a lot of chit-chat during the day when they have classes or have other deadlines because they're working these projects basically around what they're doing. So I'm trying to figure out sort of in a setting where people are very, very part-time or have school responsibilities or what have you, what would work well? I mean, I use Skype with them somewhat already to talk, but not on a very frequent basis. I'm wondering if having a chat tool is even very useful if I'm going there to meet with them in person every 2 weeks. So I'm just trying to figure out what would sort of create a more maybe informal environment than email, but at the same time not burden them with having to watch a chat tool.
I think, and this is going to I feel like Slack should have just underwritten this session, I'm sorry. But, this was something we really had to address because we do have part-time people on our staff and all of that. And I think what's nice about being able to structure channels in that is this is where business happens, is in this one, and this is how business happens here. This is the fun stuff, but also really working with people on what the notifications are. Because you can really change, maybe they don't need to have it something that pushes through to their phones every time something goes in there, but they want to have a place to come back and see all of that because the chit-chat is sometimes people's favorite part of working in a group. So you want to have that opportunity. Another tool we use for some of that, even though it can be really noisy, but if it's something where you're just trying to get a message, beam a message out to everyone, we just use WhatsApp for that. I'm just like, hey, everybody, things are due at this time, turn them in this way, or something like that. If it's just like a one-to-many, that's a really easy way for us to do it that doesn't rely on email, but it kind of depends.
For a one-to-one type situation, would you say that Skype would be effective? Or, what's the advantage of Slack versus Skype if you mainly want to do one-to-one sort of chat communication?
I know that for me, it's just because it's in the same place as everything else. So I can have all of my one-to-ones here, but I can also have a group of 3 people together where we're working on this little project, so it's the 3 of us in this channel. I like the flexibility of being able to talk to my whole team or a section of them, just 2 or 3 people, or just a one-to-one. But if you are just going to do the face-to-face conversation in Skype, then that's also great. I mean, it's really what's going to work for you workflow-wise. For us, I think it's just Slack works for what we've had, but I think playing around with the options that are out there is what has to happen, I guess.
It sounds good to experiment with those tools. Thank you very much.
Oh, sorry.
Just a quick thing to that. Your question made me think of something else that we didn't talk about, another level of distributed workforce, which is those of us managing contributor networks, people who aren't staffers but who constantly feed content into newsrooms. Most of them end up being, that's not team communication. They end up being one-on-ones, and getting them to talk to us on Slack works as an advantage for us, but most of them would just prefer would want you to adapt to whatever works best for them. So that could be Skype, WhatsApp, whatever else. I'm meeting someone at Forbes who runs their contributor network and brand voice next week. So after that, I could email you something that's useful. They'd possibly be the best people to ask about this.
Thank you guys so much. We'll be up here for other questions you have.